Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the latest EOcafe. Good to see you all here. It's a bit of a change tonight. We had planned another EOcafe today of how EO data can support ESG reporting, but unfortunately, we've had to postpone that. And casting around for what we could talk about today, and a number of people have expressed interest in SeBS and the results from SeBS, which finished a few months ago. So we thought that we would talk about it today, and I'm very happy that Alessandra Tassa, who's the project manager from ESA, will join us. She did warn she might be a little bit late, so we're catering for that, and she will join us as soon as she can. Apparently, there's some unexpected road closures in Rome. So you'll hear a lot of my voice today, I'm afraid. That's not always the best, but there we go. You'll have to put up with it. And what I'm going to do is talk about the Sentinel Benefits Study, or SeBS, and in particular, looking at its findings relative to the water sector. My talk is based on a presentation. I'm not going to show the slides today, but those slides will be available afterwards on the SeBS website, and I'm sure somebody will put the link to the SeBS website into the chat. And Alessandra should just be joining us, so that works quite nicely. So Alessandra, are you in the cafe? I see your name. You're still muted. There we go.
Hello, Geoff.
Hey, great. Okay, so the roads weren't too bad.
Exactly. I made it.
You made it, yeah. I was just about to kick off, and I just explained about the background to the cafe. So your arrival is exactly perfect. Just to introduce yourself, as we normally do in the cafe, rather than reading out a little potted bio, I much prefer that our guests just say a few words about themselves. So before I kick off on talking and giving an overview of SeBS, maybe you'd just like to say a few words about yourself and your role in ESA.
Indeed. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me. And good afternoon, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. And concerning my background, well, I am a remote sensing engineer. But with more than 15 years in ESA, I started working as a ground segment on the ground segment development for MVSAT, and then GOCE, and then Copernicus. And then I moved to the Copernicus Space Office in ESA. And since 10 years now, I am doing studies related to the programmatic aspects of the applications of Sentinel's data and Copernicus data.
Thank you. And of course, we first met when we did the geese and golden egg study into the free and open data policy that seems so long ago, but was a fun study to do. If anyone's not familiar with that. I see Tanya's reminding me I didn't give the usual introduction to keep your microphones muted unless I ask you to. Please leave your cameras on if you wish. It's always nice to see people. And if you've got any questions, pop them into the chat, and we'll try and pick them up a bit later. That's the standing introduction. There we go. So SeBS. It's a study that's been running for a few years, or has run for a few years. We finished it last summer. Within the project, we've generated 37 use case reports. We've developed what we think is a pretty robust methodology for evaluating the benefits of the use of satellite data. We've held, I haven't counted them, but a lot of workshops, very often with user communities, to bounce some of the ideas off them and to develop further links with them. And I think links to the user community is certainly one of the sort of side benefits of SeBS. And then to support that, we've also produced a number of cross-cutting analyses. looking at SMEs, looking at environmental impact, and a transversal analysis within sort of the core of the work. It's essentially a bottom-up study. When GMES was first considered by the Commission, there were various cost-benefit analyses started and commissioned from Booz & Co, from Coopers, Price Waterhouse now. And I've always said that those top-down analyses were very, very important. They convinced the politicians to put money into the program, which was great. But that I'm glad the politicians bought the arguments, but I would have been rather more skeptical. And so we talked about doing this bottom-up analysis where we're looking at the impact of a single product or service along a value chain and understanding how the use of the satellite data, in this case from Sentinel satellites, is developing value and contributing benefits. Now, we only look at the benefit side. We don't try to attribute cost. I think you'd agree it'd be very hard to attribute a part of the cost of the whole Copernicus program to an agricultural service in Poland or elsewhere. So we don't try to gather up the costs, but we do try to gather up the benefits. And of course, if you extend that far enough, then you can do a cost-benefit analysis. But you would need to have a lot of cases in order to get to that point. So our goal is to show how much value Sentinel data is generating in Europe and is delivering for Europe. Now, I've hinted at it, but we take a value chain approach. To start off with, we had, I think, 7 tiers in the value chain, but as we've gone on, we've standardized to 4 tiers that I'll tell you about in a moment. And what we do is we trace the impact of the Sentinel data along that value chain. We collected a lot of potential cases, more than 300 potential cases. Not all of them were mature enough, and I'll come on to that a little bit later. But from those 300 plus, we've identified 37 that we've analysed, of which 22 are what we call a full case, where we develop an in-depth analysis of the financial benefits, the economic benefits, and 15 short cases, which tell the story of what's happening, but don't go into analysis of the financial side, the economic side, very deeply. The full cases are reported, they lead to about 70-page reports, and the short cases are just 6 pages long. But for all of them, there is a 2-page flyer, and all this you'll find on the website, where you can find out all about the study. Now, SeBS is part of the Sentinel Benefits Observatory in ESA. It's delivering into the observatory, which Alessandra is responsible for. So Alessandra, perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about the observatory and how SeBS fits into it.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity. So the Sentinel Benefits Observatory is a new way of framing the different activities that are essentially all trying and gathering information about the benefits that the Sentinels deliver to society and to different types of users. In essence, we have been conducting different activities, and SeBS is really at the core of this. I would say it was even the kickstart of a set of activities that are increasingly being looked at with interest. At the agency, we are increasingly looking at the socioeconomic benefits derived from our own activities and from all our data and our space missions. Increasingly looking at the impact in general. You might be aware that we are doing also assessments in terms of sustainability, for instance, including about our own activities. So the idea it stems from the recognition that there is this increased interest And we want to show the impact of what we do. With Copernicus was particularly challenging because of the open and free data policy. So unlike the past where with MVSat, we really were in touch with the users, with the people that the principal investigators that requested our data. Well, now with Copernicus, we know statistics about who downloads the data, about the number of people who download the data from our hubs, but we have no clue about, or we have little information about what they are doing with the data and what are the benefits that they are deriving from this. And I think that SeBS was essential in providing much enlightenment into this and to help us understand what the users, or some of the users, of course, are doing with the data.
And we've had some really fascinating discussions with users during SeBS and during some of the workshops. Just to add to that, I think within the observatory, you're also putting together evidence of the benefits to industry, and EARSC has been collecting case studies. Some of you may well have been involved in providing some of those, but EARSC has been collecting case studies for ESA to demonstrate particularly how European industry has benefited in relation to export markets and sales elsewhere in the world. So if you've contributed to that, thank you very much. If you still want to contribute, then please feel free to send us further examples, and I'm sure Alessandra will see them mounted onto the website.
Indeed, thank you for reminding also this. We are collecting different pieces of information and showing how industry are making business out of the Sentinel data is certainly a very key message that we want to deliver.
Great. Okay, so let me say a little bit more then about the core work within SeBS. As I said, I mean, we started off developing a methodology which has been refined in a number of ways as we've performed more and more cases. The principle is that the data is coming, as the name suggests, from a Sentinel satellite. So from one or more Sentinel satellites, there is data feeding in to the product or service. It doesn't have to be, it's unlikely to be 100% dependent on the data, but the service may be impossible without data coming from a Sentinel satellite, in which case we probably attribute 100% of the benefit to the Sentinel satellites. But in some cases we attribute less, and that's one of the key steps, is this judgment of how much the Sentinel data is contributing to the overall service. So we start in the value chain with a service provider who is feeding what we call the primary user. And in every case, we're looking for this primary user. Sometimes there can be more than one, but we only need one. And one of our key rules is the engagement of the primary user. So this makes up the first two tiers of our four-tier value chain. The third tier are beneficiaries of the services offered by the primary user. So they're secondary beneficiaries or other beneficiaries. And then the fourth tier is much more widely for citizens and society about the way in which it's benefiting and feeding into everyday lives. And of course, this is an interesting aspect for the storytelling. We started with a strong focus on economic analyses. Everyone wants to know the numbers, don't they? I mean, 90% of the value is in 10% of the information. But so we very much focused on the economic analysis. But as we went on, and particularly in relation to one of the cases I'll talk about today for water quality in Germany, we started recognizing that benefits were not just in economic terms. There were other benefits as well. Now, every one of those could have a value put upon it, but some of them are very hard to value. So we preferred to talk about them and identify them. And in many ways, these became, certainly for some cases, some users, even more important or equally as important as the numbers. So we identified 6 dimensions. So the economic dimension, the environmental dimension, excuse me, the regulatory dimension, innovation and entrepreneurship, research, and not so much research into the product itself, but research that was enabled by the use of the product. And you can imagine that with satellite data, you get a much wider synoptic picture of what's happening. So there's some research which is just not possible without satellite data, or satellite data enables it. And then the 6th dimension is the societal dimension. So what we now do is we analyze each tier for each of those 6 dimensions. So that gives us a framework in which we're working. We limit the analysis to a geographical boundary, which is usually a country, not always, but usually a country. And this is because there are common market conditions, there are common regulatory conditions. The society has similar aspects. So we generally, and of course, there's also the interest from the member states. There's a geographical boundary, which is country limited, is a convenient boundary. Some of the cases are analysed at much less than national level. So that requires us then to extrapolate to the country. But that's something we do. And perhaps this is it's time to mention an important point, that in many of the analyses, particularly when we're coming to numbers, we have to make assumptions. Not all the numbers are available. We're always talking with the primary user. This is the importance of their engagement. But we're looking for to understand the numbers, but we will always make very transparent the assumptions that we've made, and we leave it for the primary user or other stakeholders to challenge us on those numbers, and that has very rarely happened. It has happened, but it's very rare. So there are 3 key rules for the cases we've studied. 1, there must be a use of Sentinel data. And in that respect, when we identify a case, ESA always make the final decision as to whether the case will be, we'll analyze the case or not. It has to be in an operational use. So we're not looking at R&D. We want to go beyond that. And the importance here is that the primary user has some understanding of how it's impacting on their work and how other users are impacted by their service. And then the final rule, which sometimes we broke and always caused us problems when we did, which is the primary user has to be engaged. I mean, in a number of cases, we try to sort of accept, the primary user. Sometimes people change jobs, sometimes they move, their hierarchy changes, so they're said, no, you can't work on this anymore. And this has happened to us several times, but each time we've tried to sort of sidestep this, it hasn't really worked. And so this really is a golden rule, the engagement of the primary user. That methodology that I've very quickly outlined there is available in a full report. We go through it in some detail. And I fully recommend the final report for SeBS, the summary report, which is a very nice interactive presentation. You can find it on the website, and put together by the ESA graphics department. We provided all the content, but the actual animations and construction of it onto the web was done by ESA. And that gives a very, very thorough overview of what we've done without going into individual cases. Of course, we hope you'll read the cases as well. Alessandra, you've accompanied on this. You've steered us in many different ways during the study. Do you have any comment to make around the methodology that we've come up with?
Yeah, well, you said it all, Geoff, so there is little to add. Maybe on my side, I think I want to emphasize what you said about transparency, that really you made all the assumptions explicit, and you validated them with the users, with the primary users. And I think that this made the reports very trustable, because people could see that all the reasoning which was behind all of the assumptions. Another thing is, for me, maybe that you were capable in these reports, in this analysis, to unpack the black box of the whole value chain, really to sit down with the user and explain how they are using the data and what is the mechanism that really creates the value for the user and for society. And I think this was very important. You used to say that you got under the skin of the cases, and I buy the expression, because I think that this is a fundamental part of what made the SeBS cases very engaging also for the readers. And it involved, finally, maybe emphasizing the involvement of the users. I mean, I must say that you said that the study took a long time, and each use case took a long time. I remember at the beginning I was asking you, but when are you going to publish the report? And you said, yeah, but the user is not available, or they are out in the fields, or they are with the icebreakers, so they are not available now. You always took the time to talk with the users, and this is something that I took back home, that the quality was stemming also from the time that you spent with the users. And I think this was very valuable, and it's visible in the reports, which was always for me a pleasure to read through.
Thank you. I think we were rewarded also by many of the users having a sort of a longer term engagement with the work we were doing and participation in the later workshops, which again helped us a lot in sort of rounding off the study and coming up with also these wider conclusions that I'll talk about later. As we tackle cases, I mean, we tried to build up a portfolio which had a wide geographic dimension to it, so as many cases as we could from different countries. We tried to diversify in terms of application areas. So the very first case we did was about the icebreakers in the Baltic, and that case was very important because I didn't say at the beginning, but our expectations when we started this was that one service would show a few hundred K of value, of benefits, but that the results were obvious. If we've got 100 different cases, each offering 100K or 200K or 500K, you quickly build up to a large number. But the first case, the value we found was enormous. I mean, the upper bound on it was about 100 million euros a year, 120 even. And because of the value that was added using radar data to help guide the icebreakers. And in some ways, that's still my favorite case. So we built up cases around interferometry, the ground movement. I'm not going into technology aspects here because you all should be familiar with that. Shipping, I've mentioned, we added a case from Greenland. And again, similarly to the icebreakers in the Baltic, the ability to service remote communities, which is enabled and made easier and more effective through the use of satellite data, is so important. We concluded about the importance of the strategic element associated with Greenland, which of course we see in spades now with all the movements from Trump. So we looked at agriculture cases. We did cases in Poland, in Denmark. We looked at different crops, grain crops, grassland, potatoes, wine, vines. And then we looked at water quality, and that's where I want to focus today, because we started to build up multiple cases in different areas. And this led to us performing a transverse analysis where we took 3 of those areas, water, roads and forestry, and sort of looked across the cases to see what we could learn additionally than just from the single cases. Now, we'd had hoped to have Jenny Attila from SeBS with us today. She has agreed to join EOcafe, but she wasn't available today because she's very much involved in the efforts to get Earth observation recognised as part of the Water Framework Directive, which is at the heart of the water quality measurements. And I say that because I'll come on to talk about it later again, but the regulatory aspects are so important, are such an important influencer over the uptake of the technology. But the first case we did in this respect, and where we started to come across all these issues, was in Germany with the Environmental Institute of the Länder of Baden-Württemberg. And we had a really good interlocutor there who worked with us. And they're using data supplied by an Earth member, EOMAP, been in the news recently, to monitor the lakes in the area of Baden-Württemberg. Now, traditionally, and still, in fact, they can measure about 15 lakes using in situ sampling techniques. They can measure, I think it's 3 points in the Bodensee, Lake Constance, which is the biggest lake in Germany. And what they get with satellite data, of course, is to be able to measure all 270 lakes and across many points, many sampling points in the Bodensee. Now, they can't replicate all the in situ measurements. All the parameters are not measurable by satellite, but they can measure many important ones, and they can measure them more quickly and much more densely and have results much more effectively. But they can't use it for reporting purposes, or at least they don't use it for reporting purposes, because it's not recognized and stated in the Water Framework Directorate. So that led us to start thinking, well, why are they doing it? And of course, they're enthusiastic. They have an enthusiast there, and that's an important lesson to take away. But they're also able to offer a better service to their citizens. Their citizens can go online and look and see the quality of the water in different lakes. So if they were thinking of going and swimming in one lake, they can look and see maybe it's closed because there's an algal bloom. So this really opened our eyes to the fact that there are benefits which are not economic. Here was a benefit to the reputation and value of the Environmental Institute. And so even though they didn't have a full budget, and in all the discussions we had, what they're trying to do is open up with the finance ministry to allow budget that they can invest in order to use the satellite service for reporting against the Water Framework Directorate. But without that being explicitly mentioned in the Water Framework Directorate, the finance directorate, the whole budget holders will not open the purse to allow them to do so. So, they're also, the Bodensee has a number of countries bordering on it, and so we also talked with some of the other countries, and the fact that data is shared. So again, you have this data sharing element and this networking element that satellite data is very, very strong. I daren't say unique, but certainly is very, very strong in being able to develop. The second case in water was in Finland. Now, interestingly, here they are using it for reporting in the Water Framework Directorate because they've been able to establish a budget. They've been able to establish that it's allowed through a clause which is expert opinion. So the experts say this is valid, so that they do so. It's the only country, I think, that does use satellite data for reporting purposes against the Water Framework Directorate. Finland has probably more lakes than any other country of a similar size. So being able to monitor all those lakes is very important, and measuring even a small proportion of them using in situ data would just be impossible. So a very strong motivation to use satellite data there. Then the third country we looked at was the Netherlands. And here it's interesting because the conditions are so different. The Netherlands are very densely populated. The lakes are often part of the land recovery in the Netherlands. So they're very shallow. So they warm up quickly, and they develop algal blooms very quickly, particularly because it's a country which has intensive agriculture. So they're now using satellite data, and again, it's one region in Holland that's using it in order to save on in situ measurements, but to get a wider picture. And here it's important because it's influencing the policy in the Netherlands and influencing the agriculture policy. It's doing that in Germany as well, but it's particularly true in the Netherlands because of the intensive agriculture. So what we see from this is that EO data satellites, they provide much more rapid coverage, frequent measurement of lakes, easier to establish trends over a wide area, so over a full country, rather than just individual points, and at a relatively fine spatial resolution. So all lakes over about 0.5 hectare in size can be measured using, monitored using satellite data. And through that, they can provide earlier warnings when something's going wrong, so they can react more quickly and treat with the problem. As I've said, it supports the evaluation of regulations, both in design and in implementation. It's in active use in Germany, Finland, and Netherlands. And we know it's under evaluation in Austria, Belgium, France, Italy, and Spain, maybe elsewhere, but those are the countries that I can identify where it's being tested and evaluated. So it's a reduced cost as an economic benefit. It supports research because there's no other way to gather data on all the lakes. So it's supporting research into different aspects of policy or different aspects of interactions with the agriculture community. And it's providing improved information for informing citizens. So that's the sort of the conclusions from those three studies. I'll hold off there, and no, because those three studies where we're dealing with water quality. We also did two cases which are very sort of related, but through water management. So they're relevant for the water sector, but they lead to this sort of rather interesting dimension of water management. In Spain, in two regions in Spain, INSAR data, so ground motion data, is being used to monitor aquifers, underground water sources. And of course, as water is abstracted from the underground source, there's an influence on the land surface. Monitors are put in place to monitor that and to guide how much abstraction can take place. But these are quite sparsely separated, they're very limited. And as a result, the sort of thresholds that they can put on the movement of the ground linked to the water abstraction are quite wide to be safe. So they have quite a wide margin for error. Using satellite data, they can look at the whole picture, not just where the gauges are, and they can look at if the ground movement is bigger in some regions. So they're able to put a closer tolerance on the movement. And this is, of course, is very important for the influence on infrastructure. They're very concerned not to damage surface infrastructure through excess movement of the ground. So this is a link to overall water management, because here there's a better guide to how much water is and can be taken from underground aquifers, and we have separately the measurement of the water quality. Over the summer, I've seen lots of pictures on the French television, I'm sure it's happening elsewhere as well, of the level of water in the underground aquifers. Because of the droughts, there's a lot of interest in how much water is there. And here you have a direct link. You have a direct link to be able to monitor where what's going on when water is abstracted. So we identify a number of conditions. One point I want to highlight is in driving the adoption. What I want to come on to in a minute is to say that if the use is so important for some countries, why are other countries not using it? Why is the use limited? And this led us to try to analyze this, to understand it in discussion with the users. And one of the key things has been the use of trusted agents. And we see, coming back to Finland, a trusted agent in SeBS, who has been able to introduce it and convince the local and the national authority for the use of satellite data. In Germany, again, an enthusiastic user who is driving the adoption. And this is a story that comes up so often. That trusted agent may be internal, but they can also be external. And I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. Now, Alessandra, you've within the observatory, you've been looking at the adoption of EO amongst the regions. Can you tell us a little bit more about sort of the findings from the Nereus work in this respect? And then I'll go on and talk a little bit more about the transverse analysis that we've done in SeBS.
Yeah, well, the initiative that we have with Nereus, which is the network of European regions using space technologies, and also together with the European Commission, is called Copernicus for Regions. And I hope that everybody is familiar with the Green Book, which was a book where we collected, Nereus collected 99 user stories about local and regional authorities in Europe using Sentinel data or Copernicus in general. And the collection was, 99 stories covering different aspects. At the time, it was mostly agriculture, forestry, and civil protection. I think it showed us that there is much interest from the regional and local authorities, but that the usage was relatively limited. The collection was done in 2018. When we tried the refresh in 2022, we got some updates, and this was interesting because we had developed what we call the usage maturity level, where we asked what you would call the primary user, which was a public authority from the region or the municipality, to tell what was the degree of maturity in the usage, meaning if it's just a test or a project funded by ESA or by the EU, or if it was a mature and operational use for which the agency, the regional agency, allocated funds. And at the time, what was interesting was that some of these cases, unfortunately not many, I must say, but there's some of these, they could report a transition towards a more mature use. So the idea is that some of these actors really made a journey into the adoption of the data. Now we have launched a new call for stories, inviting new ones, but also to refresh the old ones, because it's interesting also to look at the journey, at all the evolution in the adoption of the services. And so I hope that everybody there has already submitted the story, because the deadline is the end of this week. If not, rush to it. and we really expect to see some new cases to capture new stories.
Okay, I took that as an opportunity just to look at the questions coming up into the chat, which I'll deal with in a minute. But just let me 2 points I want to make before dealing with questions. One, we found that storytelling was a very important part of the work, in order that this catches the interest of policymakers and is usable, hopefully by the primary user, to convince their organizations to show the value they're creating. That telling the story was very, very important. So throughout this, through all the cases, we try to lay it out in an easily understood way, and to make it interesting as a story. I'm sure we're not perfect there, but even for some of the cases, we produce little videos which we use with the workshops, and those are where they're associated with the case. They're on the case page on the website. But then the second thing I just want to very quickly, and I'm conscious of the time, I said just now, if this is so effective, why is it not used more widely? And from an industry perspective, we can say, well, that means that there's quite a lot of market still to be addressed. But why do some countries and some institutions take it up and some not? We identified a number of factors, and there's a little model in the transversal report that I'm not going to talk about today. But firstly, of course, geography is a big impact. Where ground is susceptible to movement by different means, then ground motion is of interest. By different means, we looked in Italy, we looked in Norway, and of course the mechanism. And we also, well, we looked at Spain for water management. We looked at the Netherlands for underground pipelines. And of course, the mechanisms for causing the ground movement are different, but the effect and the measurement is the same. So the geography is very important, size of the country, the governance, the way the agency is organized, who holds the budget, who is controlling that, culture, whether there is a culture of innovation in the agency, the legal framework, whether I talked extensively earlier about the Water Framework Directorate. Clearly, if Earth observation, or once Earth observation becomes recognized in the Water Framework Directorate, then there's an incentive for every country to start using the data. Whereas today they have difficulties, as I outlined, in creating the conditions to take up the data. Space awareness. Space can seem complex to people who are not aware. So having somebody in an organization who knows a little about space can be a big help, as can the presence of an industry. If there's a company active in the country, then the company has an interest in selling products and services. So will help raise awareness in the organization as to the benefits of the data. And we hope our reports can help in that respect. And then the final very important factor is a champion. I talked about a trusted agent earlier. The champion can be the trusted agent, or the trusted agent can be the champion, but it can be somebody who has a different perspective, but who is willing to run with and to push the adoption of new technology. And these people are so important in the process. The trusted agent can be an outside. We found cases where the presence of a cartographic institute or an institute dealing with digital technologies, GIS, but digital more broadly, can be instrumental in uptake of these products and services. So I'm not going to go in more detail, but in the transversal report, you'll find sort of a deeper analysis of that and exploration of what we're doing. Now, SeBS has focused very much on Europe. We've tried to maintain a European dimension through it, largely because of the nature of the project. But there is interest internationally, I think, in doing this type of work. Alessandra, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about efforts to try and go further in benefits and impact assessment on an international basis.
Yeah, exactly. We try to look also at what they are doing outside from Europe. For sure, the Sentinel data are being, we found that they are being used everywhere. And even the last SeBS workshop with its international session provided some interesting examples. We try to cooperate and find stories that are also depicting the usage of Sentinel or Copernicus outside from the European borders. And there are certainly many. Many are not known, so we do this continuous effort to collect user stories. There is also a wish to try and promote a general culture of impact assessments, of trying to trace this link between the satellite data, our program, and the impact on society, which I reckon that I think is sometimes or always as important as getting to the economic figures. And to do this, I think with this need that was shared also by different colleagues, including international ones. And so we have been doing cooperating with the GeoValue group, and which has been assigned by Geo a task to develop an EO impact assessment toolkit, which should be meant to very largely also based on SeBS methodology, and should be providing some hints to conduct some preliminary impact assessments. The idea is that each service provider could have an interest in trying to understand and to measure its own impact, and likewise linking it to the use of Earth observation data. And I think, Geoff, one message that I maybe like to pick from the experience from SeBS is that what impressed me is that in many of the case studies that you undertook, many of the primary users, you said that they remained engaged, but they also reported that they have been using the reports themselves for their internal purposes, and that the exercise of trying to derive the impact on the downstream users and on society was useful also for them, because the reflection on the impact of the activities of the primary user it's an exercise which is not very common. So I think that the fact that everybody found the exercise useful, including for their own purposes, is quite a strong message. So we are trying to push with the GeoValue toolkit to push on this and trying to really foster these practices that could facilitate the gathering of information also for the Sentinel Benefits Observatory.
Anyone interested in learning more, there is a GeoValue website. It's a little bit, it suffered recently by being sort of moved from one custodian. In fact, EARSC is now custodying custodian, is that a word? Curating the website. But you can find more information on there, and hopefully that will change quite a lot over the next, I would say, 6 months, as we develop this toolkit within the Geo community. SeBS is not just important for ESA, SeBS has been important for EARSC as well. And I think Tanya can probably help us say a few words about how EARSC has benefited from the cases that we've been able to do. Tanya?
Yep. Hi, everyone. Just give me a second to spotlight myself so you can see me better. Yeah, hi. So here I'm basically more talking on behalf of my colleague Michelle, who's more involved in the links with policy and generally institutions. But the SeBS case studies are very useful. I think you've mentioned it over the course of this talk, Geoff, but with, let's say, stakeholder engagement or using concrete cases to showcase what can be done with satellite data. And we've had several meetings with the parliament or different, let's say, industrial associations such as EARSC, for example, representing the private forest owners and so on and so forth, where we can use those the cases relevant to the topic we're talking about to help them understand what can be done. So for example, maybe the MEPs, they need to know what can be tracked with satellite XYZ for understanding indicator X. So that's a very specific example, but with the SeBS case studies, we can give them several examples within a specific thematic of what can be done. And then they can come back to us with more questions, so on and so forth. Obviously, we have also our members helping us inform those exchanges, but also another example would have been with, we had a presentation last week with the cacao industry, the chocolate industry, and we have a SeBS case on cacao EUDR monitoring. So all of those kind of concrete examples of what can be done are really helpful when you're liaising with people who are not technical, who are not, let's say, an Earth observation expert or something, because it really explains in concrete, but also understandable terms and across the value chain what they can do. So I think, yeah, the SeBS case studies are really valuable. And even outside of policymaking, just when you're liaising, let's say with, for example, the forest owners or so on and so forth, we have all these cases that can help us explain. And we always bring them to any event where we know that different user communities are going to be there, because they're much easier to understand, let's say, than us just saying, oh, you can do this. So they're a really helpful tool for stakeholder engagement, as I would say, like understood broadly, whether that's with potential users or with policymakers and so on. So yeah, and because they cover quite a few different topics, and over different countries in Europe as well, that's what's super, I think, valuable to really get that broader picture of what can be done.
Okay, thanks, Tanya. I'm going to start dealing with the questions, but rather than immediately asking you to come in, Wolfhard, I want to just address your question, because I mean, you pick up exactly on the ambition, the goal of SeBS. I place great emphasis on the primary user, and this is probably a fault of not using slides and pictures, because this becomes quite visible. But the primary user is only the second tier in our value chain. The third tier is anyone who is benefiting from what the primary user is doing. So in water quality, that might be water companies, it might be farmers, it might be citizens, which would fall into the fourth tier. For roads, it may be transport logistics companies. It may be engineering companies that are repairing the roads and are interested in the stability of the ground around it. So these are the factors that we're taking account of in the third tier 3, and then societal impacts in tier 4, which in case of the roads are about delays suffered by citizens from moving around and the cost of those delays, attributed cost. This is where I talked earlier about making strong assumptions, but which are always well detailed and tested. So our goal is to try and capture as many of those secondary uses as possible. I'm sure we don't capture them all, and then to say how much benefit is happening. And of course, one of the things that's happening is the benefits are very focused within the primary user, but as they sort of spread out, they become much more numerous, but much more diffuse. So the attribution to the use of the satellite data becomes much harder. But nevertheless, that's what we try to do in all the cases. So at which point, Wolfgang, if you want to comment or to come in, I invite you to do so.
Thank you, Geoff. Basically, you already answered the question I had and commented on the point that I was trying to make. And yeah, it's definitely spreading out into more and more users of the same data set will definitely not only increase the benefit, but I believe also create new business opportunities for the downstream sector. Now, what I was trying to get at also was that from the same product, the additional value from a primary product that can be created by, so I say, elevating it to a higher level information now than really geospatial intelligence product. So this also happens by, of course, integrating other geospatial data and non-image data, non-spatial data with those. So I think if you go through the whole value chain, this is something that is very often, in my opinion or my experience, overlooked also by not only by politicians, but also by the large companies, by the large data distributors. They don't see this spread. To give you an analogy, I just came across a TV feature on why is steel production, high quality steel production, so important? Because the steel ends up in all kinds of things, in cars, in automobiles, automobiles, in pans, pots, and then also in buildings. So, and by the time you add then the outer walls of a building, the windows, all of a sudden you have a very high level product that would not be possible without steel. And I think this is something that is overlooked in Earth observation.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a great deal that can be done there. Let me. Who was next in the line for questions? Hamor. Do you want to? Hamor? Hello.
Sorry, I should have edited my name, Harriet Moore.
Harriet, thank you. Go on. Do you want to expand on what you put into the chat?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I should preface this by saying I'm very new to EO, so I've just started working with satellite data around air quality, and so I'm, I can sort of have a go at explaining what I mean.
Your background then?
I'm actually a geospatial health researcher.
Okay.
So the geospatial has previously meant regional environmental data or health data.
Yeah.
And I'm currently Wellcome funded to do some research around the impact of methane on health outcomes. And that's where I've started working with Sentinel data. And we're applying for some funding to see if we can develop column data, including drones on ground, monitoring stations, and looking at ground truthing some of that Sentinel data to improve national emissions reduction estimates in low to middle income regions. So that's sort of what I'm interested in, well, that's what I'm doing. But I'm also involved with a research team that has developed some very precision flood modeling tools at the University of Loughborough. And we've been, over the past few years, working on the idea of multi-hazards and their health outcomes, which Tanya knows about because we had an event last week that Lucy came to, which was great. And we're trying to establish methods of mapping multi-hazard chains. So starting from, say, a meteorological point, the translation into, hydrological events, ecological events, and the points along the chain that have health outcomes. And one of the areas that my colleague, Professor Liang, is really interested in, and will be a focus if we do, fingers crossed, make it through the Faraday, is the impact of flooding on water quality and how that translates into health outcomes. And I'm at the University of Lincoln in a rural and coastal health institute that was established late last year. And Lincolnshire is flat. It is reclaimed fenland. And I started talking to UKHSA colleagues about the fact that when it floods, you have things like this, you have this rural urban mosaic of sort of small rural settlements and huge agricultural farms, and then weird little urban centers dotted all over the place. And when you get a lot of flooding, you get things like the chicken farms run into the runoff flows into the water sources, and there have been these sort of sporadic outbreaks of E. coli over time to do with cross-contamination, and we started talking about how do you measure that consistently? Could we develop that multi-hazard chain from meteorological events, hydrological events, water quality impacts on health. And we very quickly realized that the type of data we were interested in, the water quality data, it exists, but it is not easy to get your hands on. It is high security data. So what we're applying for funding for is to see if we can do some of the field work ourselves after flood events and look at a sort of cross section of our county in urban, rural and coastal environments to try and capture the, on the ground what's happening. But we have a challenge, which is when it floods in Lincolnshire, I don't know if anyone spent much time in Lincolnshire, but when it really floods, you ain't going nowhere quickly. Like it really floods. And there are farmers around here who for months at a time, their fields are just covered in swans who think it's a lake because it may as well be a semi-permanent lake as opposed to like an agricultural sector. And that means you can't really go and very easily do the water sampling, probably at the most immediate time where you're likely to see that cross-contamination of agriculture into water bodies. So I suppose a few people have mentioned EO as a potential option. I don't know how immediate it would be, whether you'd be looking at what kind of lag times you'd be looking at and how that we could maybe relate that to health. But yeah, I suppose I don't really have the right background to understand what would be the potential of EO for looking at water quality in the aftermath of a flood event.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there are plenty. I mean, I think there are some connections you've made on the through the call, and people will be happy to sort of contribute ideas. ESA is also, of course, a very good source of information. So, I mean, two things spring to mind. I mean, one is the use of the data because of, again, this is the ability to have wide coverage and fairly and regular coverage. And secondly, the different types of data that's available can well give you inputs into what you're doing. I don't know if anyone else wants to join or to comment on that. Please feel free to reach out to Harriet either through the chat here or outside the call.
Thank you. Do you mind if I put my email address in the?
No, that's fine.
Awesome. Thank you.
I skipped that a little bit at the beginning to say that the chat, you can also use the chat for just exchanging information and passing on. So please feel free to do that. We've overrun a little bit, but hopefully that's been of interest to people. Just before we close, let me thank Alessandra for joining us. If you have any final words you want to contribute, Alessandra, then now's the moment.
Thank you, Geoff, just to thank you for the invitation and also for all this journey, the SeBS journey. It's been quite interesting, and I think it really helped us to structure our activities and our interest in this respect. And it convinced us that we need a SeBS follow-on, so we are looking forward to continue doing this kind of analysis. And maybe just as a salutation, we are going to have a session on socioeconomic benefits derived from the use of Earth observation and from Sentinels, the Living Planet Symposium in Vienna. So keep following us and also this kind of activities in Vienna. And if you have any interesting user story, be it with the Copernicus for Regions or through EARSC, please continue giving us these pieces of information because we are really using this type of information, presenting real user stories in front of our ministers and our delegates to help them defend the fact that we need to sustain the program. Sometimes you might think that this is given for granted, but it's not. So if you think that Copernicus is useful and you are using the data, please help us to gather this information. Tell us, and we will tell politicians and our funders.
And I'll echo that point as well, and that we do have this database of cases, and we would be very interested if anyone with us knows of a potential case, a suitable case that they would be interested in putting forward for analysis. We'd be very interested to hear about it, and hopefully to pick it up and do analysis. I outlined the sort of the golden rules during my talk. Yeah, it has been a nice journey, Alessandra. We've come some way in this work. Hopefully, we can go further in the future. Thank you, everyone, for being with us today. Hope you found that explanation of SeBS to be of interest and to be relevant. Feel free to reach out and contact us to talk further, and hopefully see you in 2 weeks' time when we're talking with Lisa Simonetta about the CMIN later this year and the private sector engagement. So in the meantime, have a good 2 weeks. Good Mardi Gras, is it? And see you in 2 weeks' time. Anyone wanting to stay on and have a chat, they're very welcome. We turn off the recording. You just open up your microphone if you want to say anything, and we'll hang on.